Medical professionals of Reddit, when did you have to tell a patient I've seen it all before to comfort them, but really you had never seen something so bad, or of that nature? This one of those threads you hate yourself for reading but can't stop. I showed up to a house for a possible overdose. 3 firefighters and a police officer were on top of a man who was prone and naked from the waist down. They immediately told my partner and I to restrain the patient to the gurney because the patient was combative. It turns out he took something thinking it was weed, but turned out to be laced with something else, possibly PCP. During his trip he attempted to cut his penis off, but wasn't successful. As fate would have it, I knew the patient personally and tried to comfort him on the way to the hospital. During the ride he became somewhat cognizant and was ashamed of himself. I tried to comfort him as I held his penis in place. I would be lying if I said I had seen a severed penis before. I'm a nurse, and I work in a pediatric. A young woman brought her baby in to be seen for vomiting. I asked her to put the baby on the scale. While on the scale I noticed a strong odor of bug spray, so I asked about it. Mom, a roach crawled into her mouth, so I sprayed a little right in there. She said it matter-of-factly, like it was no big deal. Up calls to the police, CPS and a 1:1 sitter for the child and the mom. When all was said and done the baby was fine and turned over to her grandmother, so no worries there. I have no idea what happened to the mother. I don't believe she was intending to hurt the child. I think she was just butt-ass ignorant. I worked as a mental health tech to get through undergrad. 15F in the adolescent ward claims to have swallowed a staple. But whatever, as I'm taking her down to x-ray I tell her about the dime I swallowed when I was a kid. It happens. Well, turns out she underestimated the number of staples by around 100. Every printout given by the therapists had been a swallowed staple. She had gotten staples from the other kids. The x-ray of her abdomen looked as if it were a weird staple-y snow globe. And yet, somehow, she was back to trying to steal psych ward staples a week later. Never did figure out how they removed them all. A little late to the party. Not the worst, but I had a patient once with a stomach bleed and a small bowel obstruction. We had to put in an NG tube that goes in your nose and down to your stomach to drain/decompress his stomach, which was pretty distended and hard. I'm inserting the tube, and as soon as it hits this guy's gag reflex he projectile vomits and sprays very dark, half-digested blood all over himself, the bed, the wall, and the floor. It's basically a scene from The Exorcist. I had to dive out of the way and somehow was unscathed. He couldn't stop for almost 10 minutes as we're trying to get this thing down to where it needs to go. Finally finish placement and it immediately suctions out 3 liters of this black sludge that is old, digested blood. Part was mortified, and we had to play it off like, oh no it's fine. It's really common to vomit during the procedure. We'll just go get some towels and clean you up. My coworker and I left the room and just stared at each other in silent shock. Had a patient who needed a lower GI study to find/fix a bowel bleed. To get a study done you need to poop clear mucus. 3 days we bowel prepped with heavy laxatives and enemas. He barely pooped anything. He puts on the call light at 6:45, 15 minutes before my shift ends. He calmly says, I kinda want to try and poop. He said it so casually I figured he was going to toot out another gas bubble and walk back. He stood from the bed, took one step, and the floodgates burst. 3+ days of the most rancid liquid stool I had ever encountered. It just wouldn't stop. He left a river of stool from the bed to the bathroom, coated the walls as he bent to park his butt on the toilet, and continued to dump out 7 people worth of poop. In my 9 years I have never seen that much come out of a person. He was not a large man. He was so embarrassed, but I just kept my face as solid as possible, grabbed half the linen closet and 3 packages of Cavi wipes, and sopped it up. Told him this happens all the time. Edit. Thanks for my first gold. Edit to my edit. Thanks for my first platinum and all the kind words. I love what I do. Not a medical professional, but a story about my father. After years of a blood disease, his spleen had to be removed as it had swollen to a size that made breathing difficult. Apparently the surgeon had a photo taken post-extraction where he is cradling my dad's 22.0 pound spleen. To top it off, One day into recovery, when doing one of those gentle push on the abdomen type exams on him, my dad's sutures catastrophically failed, and he let loose a spray that coated the doctor, his nurse, and a good portion of the ceiling. Luckily for dad, the hospital staff was on point that day and kept him alive despite his body's best effort. I heard all of this from the doctor while he was removing the line of staples that went from crotch to sternum some weeks later. Dad didn't like to share, apparently. Not medical professionals, but we were the patients. My daughter, who was 3 at the time, had to have a cavity filled. As we were leaving, the dentist told me just to watch my daughter because sometimes kids chew their gums because it's numb and feels weird. So the drive home took 30 minutes and I had been talking to my daughter the entire time to keep her busy. I park my car in my driveway, opened the passenger seat to get my daughter out, and her entire lower lip on the left side is gone. She had chewed it off down to her chin. She ended up in emergency surgery, but the surgeon kept telling us it would be fine, and he sees this stuff all the time. She ended up having multiple surgeries, and when she was finally healed, the surgeon told us that it was the worst injury like that he had ever seen. He wasn't sure how she would heal, but you can hardly tell it happened now. Lots of stories, many already covered by others. I will share this particular story with my legs crossed. Motorcyclist came in after someone left-turned without checking. He had gone over the hood, slid and somehow somersaulted, landing on his ass sitting up. He slid across intersection mostly on his ass, getting serious road rash. Luckily he was only a block from hospital and ambulance. They pack him and bring him to the ER. We end up cutting off his chaps and jeans and begin the cleanup of gravel and sand embedded in his thighs and ass when all of a sudden, his testicles fall out of his scrotum. He had basically sandpapered a hole in his scrotum while skidding on his ass. The attending pauses, grabs the saline, irrigates scrotum and nuts, fondles them back into place while humming. I handed him some gauze to pack the wound and smiled at the patient who was under a local. Then I went on break, went fetal and heaved. Edit. Thank you for my first gold. Worked in a heart procedure lab that helped try to get rid of bad heart rhythms. A prisoner came in for a last-ditch effort to help his failing heart and had developed a condition called ventricular tachycardia. Setting the patient up and looking at his rhythm/heart, it looked pretty bad. Before we got started he grabbed me on the arm and said, "I'm scared. Is it going to be okay? We have very talented physicians here, sir, and they do this all the time." The ventricular tachycardia was set off during the procedure and deteriorated into ventricular fibrillation. We were able to resuscitate him, but he never woke back up. Comfort your patients, folks. One guy had a penis inflammation. Was like 14 inches long and 6 wide. I could practically sense the pain. Years ago, 2000, I was playing soccer and noticed a little skin irritation underneath my arm. I thought it would go away, but it developed into a weird thing. It was about 2 in diameter and grew to be a collection of essentially looked like hundreds of skin tags grew together in a little circle. I went to the doctor who didn't have a clue, and he sent me to a specialist. While there it seemed like he didn't know either. This was further evidenced when 4 other doctors came in to take a look and were really interested. They took a ton of photos and told me they hadn't seen this before and couldn't really offer any medication and said they would monitor it. About a week later the skin tags developed little circles on the top that turned into scabs within a couple days. Then, the thing just kinda dried up and fell off me. It was fucking weird, and to this day I have no idea what it was. I was not comforted. I had to have my leg rebuilt after a car accident and was eventually sent to Duke University for my surgery. My surgeon was supposed to be like the best orthopedic surgeon in the country. I think he used to work for the Baltimore Ravens. Anyway, all the doctors from my hospital at home were very unsure if I would even have a functioning leg, let alone walk normal again. The first appointment at Duke, the dude told me it was really not a big deal and he would have me fixed almost good as new. I honestly thought he was just trying to be nice and optimistic, but he was very serious. 5 months later I was walking and learning how to run again. He said I was one of the most complicated surgeries he has had to do, and a group of surgeons flew in to observe him do it. My aunt started her nursing career in a county hospital, which means you get all the homeless folks. A guy came in with the whole of the back of his leg and butt utterly and very deeply infested with maggots. He just hadn't gotten around to coming in earlier, he said. The depressing thing is that, while it was a first for my aunt, it was by no means the last. Apparently it's more common than you'd think. Young man, 18, apparently comes in about something else, trying to work up courage. Right before he should actually be leaving. This can be really annoying if there are people waiting. He says, I need your advice. Back quote, I'm having sex with my mother. What do I say? Oh my god. No, I didn't. I said, this isn't the first time someone has told me this. This wasn't true. Turns out that he knew it was wrong. That mother had initiated it. He was trying to extricate himself, and he was desperate for help. But the thought that someone else had been in his position meant to him that he hadn't been judged, that he wasn't doomed or would go to hell, and that there was hope. But he didn't know what to do, because the person to whom he should looked for advice was actually his abuser. But the lie helped defuse the situation. As a medical student doing my first placement in the emergency department, I was waiting outside the triage room to ask the nurse something. I was the lowest ranking, most coolest person in the department. I knew a lot about the Krebs cycle, not a whole lot about, medicine. A young man came up to me and said he was sorry to disturb me, he just wanted to check. It was just, well, not a queue jump or anything, but he wanted to check, can this definitely wait for triage? He then unwrapped a towel from his hand and showed me his thumb, which he had dropped a loaded barbell onto. It was shattered, just flattened, with splinters of bone coming out. I stared at it. He stared at it. I stared at it. Then I told him, oh yes, no problem at all. He'd better take a seat and I'd make sure someone was with him right away.